Okay, so today I'm going to be talking about cooking with kids. Just to get started, we're going to talk a little bit about how to prepare for cooking with kids. Number one, you want to prepare by first washing hands. This is so important to drive home with kids because you want to make sure they understand not only that they need to wash their hands, but the reason behind it. Not only to make sure they're being hygienic in the kitchen, but to make sure that they're not spreading any illnesses or germs and bacteria to the food that's going to be eaten by friends or family or whoever. So that's a super important tip to drive home when you're teaching your kids just to start off any cooking lesson. Number two, cover clothes, meaning maybe a big t-shirt or an apron, just to make sure we don't spread any mess or ingredients anywhere that we don't want them. Putting our hair up, or if you have short hair, not worrying about it, but making sure we're not getting hair in our food because nobody wants that. Starting with a clean area. This is super important, especially if you want to end with a clean area when you're cooking with kids, which can sometimes seem impossible, but starting with the area that's prepared and clean. And lastly, adult supervision. Depending on the age of the student that you're teaching or your own child, making sure that they know that there needs to be an adult present in the kitchen. And that's on a age basis. So if your child is old enough to maybe just have you in the house while they're cooking, but just making sure they're in an atmosphere where cooking is okay at that time. Safety. This is one of the biggest things when it comes to having kids in the kitchen. Number one, knife safety. Anytime children are going to be using knives, they need to know how they need to be using them. Some of the biggest tips for this are when we're carrying knives, whether that just be to your workstation or back to the drawer, having the blade going down, making sure it's not up to where if I fell or if something crazy happened that it would hurt anybody, making sure that they're being so safe with how they carry the knife, how they hold the knife when they are cutting, and how they're holding their other hand, making sure they're doing that kind of bear claw motion, making sure no fingers are pointing out and we don't have any accidents when it comes to knives. Something that can really help with knife safety and just safety in general is making sure that the children have a place that is at the appropriate level for them to cook, meaning the counters are in reach. And whether they're not, maybe putting up a stool or a chair, just making sure that the kids can 100% reach where they are cooking. And this also means hot surfaces. This is so, so important. And I think a lot of parents and teachers' worst nightmare when it comes to teaching kids how to cook. Hot surfaces, making sure that they understand just how dangerous they can be. Practicing turning on the flame, whether that's a gas stove or a electric stove, and with the oven, learning how to adjust the temperature, learning how to adjust the flame, and most importantly, learning how to turn this appliance off. That is one of the most important tips. No matter what happens, even if you didn't touch the stove at the end of a cooking session, thinking, let's check the stove and make sure we didn't accidentally turn it on, absolutely turning them off at all costs. And this just leads us to a couple of different tips when it comes to cooking in general with kids. Have extra ingredients on hand. This can be super, super, super beneficial because sometimes things don't always make it in the pan or in the mixing bowl. So that can help adults not be as stressed out when mishaps happen in the kitchen, which they will happen with kids. So making sure that students know that it's okay to mess up. We have extra ingredients. Maybe if there were supposed to be 4 potatoes in the recipe and 1 dropped on the floor, having an extra one on hand can just take your stress level down. Number 2, avoiding sticky ingredients. This can just be a nightmare, especially if you're working in a school kitchen. Things like honey, things like syrup, things like marshmallow, things that you can avoid, try to avoid if you can, because altogether, kids, sticky hands, it's going to be all over the place. This leads us to number 3, clean as you go. This is super, super important that kids learn this idea of once we put something in the oven or once we put something in the mixing bowl, maybe we can clean up the area we just worked at to get on top of our dishes and make sure that we're not left with a crazy mess at the very end. And then some last things that kids wish adults knew when it comes to learning how to cook and be in the kitchen. As adults, we shouldn't overly correct kids. Obviously, we're there for supervision and to make sure if they have any questions that we can answer them and to guide as they go. But a lot of times kids can get super discouraged if they feel like they're not doing anything right and they're not truly getting the experience of them learning. And that leads us to number two, don't get frustrated with failure. This is super important. If you want your student or your child to grow as a cook or grow in the kitchen and be able to learn, knowing that it's okay to mess up a recipe, it's okay to drop a cookie on the floor. That happens, and that happens to adults too. Number three, don't rush them. Kids need to learn at their own pace, and sometimes this might lead to standing around and watching them cut it in not the right way just for them to learn the right way. So don't rush them, let them go at their own pace. Number four, don't get too mad at a mess. It's inevitable. Kids are messy. Cooking is messy. Put the two together, it's gonna be crazy messy. But staying on top of your dishes, teaching them how to clean as you go, and overall just accepting it's going to be a mess and making sure they're responsible for that mess and know that when they create a mess in the kitchen, they clean it up in the kitchen. And this leads us to our last tip, have patience. Kids are learning too. We all were in that stage at one point or another. And making sure to encourage them as they grow and telling them that cooking is fun and also remembering that this is a skill that is so important that they can use for the rest of their lives and will be such a crucial skill to have. So overall, having patience with them and being encouraging. And that's all I have.